Good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another intensivecarehotline.com live stream. And today's topic is 10 signs of an ICU that's negative and where you don't get best care and treatment. And that's pretty much tying in from last week, where I was talking about 10 signs of an ICU that's very positive and where you get best care and treatment. So it's almost like the sequel from last week. Anyway, so let's dive right into it. Or before we dive into it, we're still waiting for a few more people to come in. We're only live for about a minute now. So let's just wait a couple of more minutes. So just a few housekeeping things. Whilst I go through today's 10 points, you're welcome to ask any questions about today's topic. And if you don't have questions that are on today's topic, you can ask them after the presentation, after I've gone through the 10 points. And you're also welcome to dial in over the phone. We've got about an hour today in total. I do these YouTube lives once a week. They're usually about topics that I encounter quite frequently when talking to families in intensive care, but it also comes from my decades of experience in intensive care. That leads me to, you may wonder what makes me qualified talking about this topic. I am an intensive care nurse by background. I have worked in intensive care for over 20 years in 3 different countries. I have worked as a nurse unit manager in intensive care for over 5 years, and I've been consulting and advocating for families all around the world in intensive care for nearly 10 years now through intensivecarehotline.com. I'm also the founder of Intensive Care at Home, where we provide home care services for long-term intensive care patients, predominantly for clients with adults and children with tracheostomy and ventilation, but also non-invasive ventilation, BiPAP, CPAP, home TPN, seizure management, anyone that needs an intensive care nurse at home. That's what we do at intensivecareathome.com, and you can find more information there. For our viewers in the US, we are an hour early today. Normally it's 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Saturday night. Today it's 7:30 p.m. Simply, we have gone into daylight savings here in on the East Coast in Australia, in Sydney and in Melbourne. So we have turned the clocks forward, and that's why we're an hour earlier today. I hope that you can still come. And when you change clocks in early November in the US, will be another hour earlier. So from your end, anyway. I hope that's not going to stop us from going through today's topic or any future topics for that matter. So let's dive right into today's topic, 10 signs of an ICU that's negative and where you don't get best care and treatment. And, for any of you that have followed me for any length of time, you will probably already know what's coming, but I know there's going to be plenty of people watching this video that haven't come across the work that I'm doing and haven't come across, our case studies, and for them it's brand new. They might have just had a loved one going into intensive care and they have no idea what they're dealing with, and I also want to read out an email in a minute. I should read out the email now because that sort of sets the scene. I think it really sets the scene, and it's sort of an email that I had this morning actually. So I have an email from Nicole, and Nicole writes, "My mother was on life support after having a ruptured brain aneurysm. I was pushed to take my mother off life support by my local small hospital. After only being on it for a few hours, they said they refused to live flight her to the nearby city, where they usually send people in a critical condition. I was repeatedly told she was not going to survive after her only being there for a couple of hours. I get a second opinion and find she could have survived, do I have any rights? Wow, what a disturbing but also powerful email from Nicole here. And, I've already responded to that email to Nicole and basically saying, yes, of course, she has rights. And of course, if she would have reached out at the time, we would have helped her to get best care and treatment. But it's also a sign that, ICUs, emergency rooms, EDs, whatever, they are negative. They're trying to manage their bed flow, and they're very quick to turn off life support if they can. And more importantly, if you let them get away with it, you got to take responsibility. That is also very important. I can give you all the signs all day long, but you also need to take responsibility for the outcomes that you're getting. So, that leads me to number one, of the 10 signs. It's that ICUs are negative. They're negative. I mean, you don't know what would have happened to your mother, Nicole, if they would have flown her to the next ICU. They would have said, yep, instead of her dying, we're going to operate on her brain, we're going to operate on the brain aneurysm, and would have taken it from there. So a bad ICU is simply negative, and you can't afford that negativity. You need people that give you hope, that give you perspective, and I think that's what we are here for at intensivecarehotline.com. We're giving you perspective. We don't have all the answers, but we're giving you perspective. I can give you perspective from my vast experience in ICU, and I can put things in perspective for you. And with that email from Nicole, for example, I can put in perspective for Nicole that that's not the way how it should be. And if you would have contacted me at the time, I would have said to you, yep, here are treatment options. Let's talk to the doctors, let's talk to the nurses, let's make sure that they know you talk to someone that understands the area just as much as they do, right? And that is really important, that you have clinicians on your side, on your team, that can advocate for you and that can put things in perspective for you. So that's number one. ICUs are negative. And that leads me to number two. It's really like, and this is a term that, I didn't create, but that I've heard over and over again, that families are coming to us and they're telling us like, oh yeah, they're giving us the doom and gloom talk. It's all doom and gloom. Again, that is another sign of a negative ICU, where you get all the doom and gloom talk, and you can't have that. You can't have the doom and gloom talk of, oh yeah, your loved one isn't going to survive, your loved one won't have any quality of life, it's all hopeless. So again, I'll give you an example here so that you can understand what I mean by that. And this is a very current example. So we're working with a client at the moment who has their 35-year-old family member in ICU. We had a cardiac arrest at home after some heavy drinking, went into ICU, cardiac arrest, has a small hypoxic brain injury, but the heart is fine, heart is beating fine, no arrhythmias, ejection fraction is fine, and the liver has gone off a little bit, the kidneys have gone off a little bit, but no other life support besides ventilation at the moment. And the ICU was telling the family, well, he won't survive, and if he does survive, he will have brain damage, he will end up in a nursing home, he won't have any quality of life. Again, like my first 2 points, they are negative, it's about doom and gloom. So then the family was adamant that he should go to another ICU that's closer to home for them, which they actually achieved. Initially, again, the other ICU said, oh, we're going to get palliative care involved. Again, that he's not going to survive. And if he does survive, he won't have any quality of life and so forth. So then, obviously, we were starting to talk to our client and we were talking to the doctors. We were looking at medical records. And then we laid out some treatment options for them. And we said, look, you got to go back to the ICU with these questions. And palliative care was adamant, no, we need to get palliative care involved and it's all hopeless. And, but before they got palliative care involved, we were asking all the right questions. What about this treatment option? What about that treatment option? Also asking about facts and figures. So for example, the research says that around 90% of intensive care patients survive. So that's the overwhelming majority of patients going into ICU. And this gentleman is 35 years of age. So the odds are in his favor, right? He's not 95, he's 35. So, the odds are in his favor. And lo and behold, after a few more days of treatment and after a few more days of the family standing their ground, now he's sort of slowly improving, even though he's on a heparin infusion, and even though he has some bleeding going on, he probably needs some blood transfusion, but he's now slowly waking up, right? And there's signs that the brain is working. He's 35. How can you give up on someone that's 35? But how can you give up on anyone unless it's their wish? So, and that leads me to my next point. It's about no hope. So a negative ICU gives families no hope, and they do it on a self-serving level. They give families no hope so they can stay in control of the narrative, right? And how do they stay in control of the narrative? Well, they stay in control of the narrative to keep repeating over and over again that there is no hope, that your loved one won't survive. They will say things like, and if they do survive, they won't have any quality of life. They end up in a nursing home. They need care around the clock. Maybe. But who's to say that that's sort of quality of life that's acceptable for the person? I don't know. So a negative ICU will give you no hope. They will give you the doom and gloom talk to stay in control of the narrative so that it's easier for them to sell you on bad news, and it's easier for them to quote unquote sell you on a withdrawal of treatment. So therefore, it's very important that you stay in control of the narrative. And you can do that with our help. We can help you in creating your own narrative, creating your own story. Don't let other people create your story. Because that's what ICUs want to do. They want to create their own story so they can stay in control of the outcome. You got to take ownership of that. And you got to stay in control of the outcome. Next, a negative ICU is judging you and your wishes. Again, comes back to the whole negativity, comes back to ICUs claiming that if your loved one is going to survive, that they won't have any quality of life, and that it's quote unquote in your loved one's quote unquote best interest to die, right? So, and they're judging you on that. Well, you want to give your loved one the best chance to survive, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can worry about quality of life later. Plenty of time to talk about quality of life. Well, there's no point in talking about quality of life once someone has passed away, right? What's the point? You can only talk about quality of life if someone actually is alive. That's when you can start talking about quality of life. Plenty of time to talk about end of life. No rush. What's the urgency? What's the rush? Bed space in ICU, finances in ICU, staffing levels, research projects that are going on. Is that what is important? Is that why the ICU is telling you that the quote unquote best option is to withdraw treatment? Got to look behind the scenes. So don't let ICUs judge you. You are the captain of your own ship. Next, another sign that an ICU is negative and that you won't get best care and treatment is that they are dismissive to your suggestions, and whether that's around treatment options that you've researched, whether that's around what you want for your loved one, whether that's around what your loved one told you they would want in a situation like that, they're dismissive of your suggestions, right? That is another sign of a negative ICU. Don't let other people be dismissive of your suggestions. It's your reality and your reality only. And you got to make suggestions that are in the best interest of your loved one and not of anybody else. It's as simple as that. Just keep standing your ground. But if they are dismissive of whatever you're suggesting, it's another sign that you are not in the right place with your loved one. And I can give you plenty of examples here, for example, especially not only from COVID in the last 2 years, but even prior to COVID, sort of But let's maybe just tie right in with COVID because that's sort of fresh for everyone. Um, During COVID, a lot of patients ended up in ICU with ARDS, and they were often being proned. Proning didn't work. And when we had clients, we then went back to the clients and said, hey, have they told you about ECMO? And of course they didn't. A lot of lives can be saved with ECMO for ARDS, and a lot of lives have been saved, but obviously during COVID, ECMO beds were very scarce. They were scarce before COVID, but COVID just made it even worse. And, and then they started suggesting ECMO, or we started suggesting ECMO to the ICU, and it was dismissed. Oh no, this patient is not a candidate for ECMO. Well, I know what it means. I know the criteria. So again, don't let other people create your reality. You create your own one by doing your research, by getting a professional on your side that can help you with getting a second opinion, that can help you with getting perspective, and that can talk to the clinicians in ICU on the same level. Next, number 6. A negative ICU is not interested in your loved one or in your family, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, I can tell you from experience, when I worked in ICU at the bedside, I walk into a bed space on my shift, and to me, a lot of patients are, look-alike, so to speak. They're on a ventilator, they're in induced coma, they don't talk. So, you walk into a shift and you see patients as, oh yeah, this patient has a pneumonia, this patient was in a car accident, this patient fell off a roof, this patient's got heart failure, and the list goes on. So with that, you're depersonalizing people, okay? And that's a big danger in ICU because you're also getting desensitized because, a lot of patients are quote unquote look-alike, But at the end of the day, it's, for you, it's your loved one, it's your mom, it's your dad, it's your spouse, it's your child. For you, it's not a look-alike. You've seen your loved one walking around the day before. You've seen your loved one having, a joyful day the day before, and now all of a sudden they're in ICU and everything has changed. And, professionals in ICU forget about that, right? For them, it's just another pneumonia. It's just another car accident or another heart failure patient, But, we know it's not like that. But also ICU professionals forget about that, And if the emphasis is not on, well, what did your loved one do? What did their life look like on a day-by-day basis? What did they do for fun? Where do they live? What does their day look like? That's very interesting. It's also very important to, emphasize that for you, your loved one has a personality that in ICU has gone out of the window while they're in an induced coma and treated for a critical illness. And if you don't see any interest from the ICU about your loved one as a person, they will treat them just like another number. And another number from the ICU perspective means, oh yeah, it'll cost us whatever it costs us a day, it'll take up so many staff, it'll probably take up so many days in ICU. They're not interested in what your loved one is like as a person. Where does he or she fit into your family? If they're not asking those questions, that's a red flag. Hi, Modema, nice to see you again. Next, number 7. A negative asking. Yes, next is that a negative ICU is sort of trying to tell you that you have to make a decision tomorrow by 3 o'clock or any other timeline. You have to make a decision. Do you? You don't know what their agenda is. You don't know whether you making a decision about something tomorrow at 3 o'clock is the only option. You can only know that if you talk to someone like me who can give you perspective. right? So there's often the notion of, oh, tomorrow by 3 o'clock, you have to make a decision whether you want to take your loved one off the ventilator. Tomorrow by 3 o'clock, you have to make a decision whether your loved one should have a tracheostomy. Maybe, maybe not. So, you don't have to do anything. Don't let ICUs impose artificial timelines on your schedule. You have to do the groundwork, which means you have to do the research. Don't take everything for face value. You gotta look behind the scenes, behind the curtains, and find out what the meaning is behind it. Does the ICU want to do a trach because they then want to send your loved one out to LTAC? This is for our US audience. LTAC is very specific to our audience in the US. Or do they want to do a tracheostomy because, they want to start an aggressive weaning process, or they want to start a transition to a service like intensive care at home? You got to find out the motives. Is this really in the best interest of your loved one? Right? Why do they ask you that you have to make a decision tomorrow by 3 o'clock that, whether you want to take your loved one off life support and let them die or not? You don't have to do anything. If you want your loved one to live, you just ignore that. And no ICU can force you to remove life support, not one. Keep that in mind. Okay. So, a good ICU will work with you and will work with your timelines, not with artificial constraints around the timelines that are convenient to the ICU. Okay. Another negative sign, number 8. They won't let you come to the ward rounds. That is a major red flag. If they're sending you out when the doctors are doing their rounds, that is a major red flag. What is it that they have to hide? What is it that you can't hear about your loved one? Major red flag. So if they're sending you out, and you can only ask questions afterwards, major red flag. I believe that families need to give input into the treatment, and again, coming back to what I said earlier, because your loved one is a whole person. They're not just a quote-unquote pneumonia or a rib fracture or a heart failure. They're much more than that. So your input matters, and if they don't want your input, that's a major red flag. And that leads me to my next point. A negative ICU has limited visiting hours, right? So if they have something archaic like visiting hours are from 10 to 11 and from 3 to 5 in the afternoon, that's from last century. An ICU should have an open door policy. Now, as we all know, with COVID, that went out of the window in the last 2 years because, ICUs were more or less shut down. And it was cruel, absolutely cruel. People were dying in ICU and families were only able to see them on a Zoom call, on a WhatsApp call. Atrocious. So that's another negative sign. If the ICU is limiting your visitation rights, that is a major red flag. Again, what do they have to hide? What is it that you can't see at 1 p.m.? What is it that you can't see at 10 p.m. at night? There's nothing to hide. Okay. Next, number 9. They're asking you to come to family meetings at short notice without a written agenda. So you might have heard me say before that, when it comes to family meetings in ICU, that, A, an ICU should give you ample notice, and B, they should give you a written agenda. Right? So, and if they don't do that, what is it that they have to hide? Think about that. Family meetings are a pre-arranged setup in ICU, where the ICU wants to stay in control of the narrative. They want to set the framework, they want to set the agenda. And if you follow suit blindly, they will set the frame, they will set the agenda, and they will stay in control of the narrative. You need to do a pattern interrupt, and you need to ask for a family meeting. And you probably should also change the time. If they tell you come tomorrow at 3 o'clock, you should probably say, well, can't do 3 o'clock, but I can do 3:30. Don't let them dictate the terms. Do not do that. You need to stay in control. And if they don't give you an agenda, what is it that they have to hide? So you need to be prepared for a family meeting. In a family meeting, generally speaking, ICUs know what to say, they know how to say it, they know when to say it, they know what information they don't want to share. And again, by doing so, they are in control of the narrative. They are in control of the narrative. By you getting a written agenda up front, well, you can then decide whether you go to the family meeting or whether you can tell them, look, I don't like to talk about end of life. Let's just take that off the agenda. So, be prepared. Number 10. They are pushing you towards DNR or NFR. Right? So similar to what I said before, when they're pushing you towards end of life or withdrawal of treatment, they will also try and push you towards a do not resuscitate order or towards a not for resuscitation order. That's another sign of a negative ICU. Another sign that they want to stay in control of the narrative. Another sign that they want to wind down treatment. Right? So again, you need to object that at all costs, unless it's your loved one's wish. But I would not consent to do a DNR or NFR, because if you do, it's sort of the first step to removal of treatment. And what's making it even worse, in some ICU, I've seen that some ICUs, they fill in a DNR or an NFR form and they won't even tell you, which is illegal, by the way. But I've seen it all. I've seen it all. And you need to watch it like a hawk. Next, we are beyond 10 points, but I've got a few more because, it's just, even though I named it the 10 signs, I've got a few more. There is probably much more to talk about. So, next, they're very paternalistic or hierarchical and political. And you get the feel for that, if you can figure it out very quickly, whether it's a political ICU, whether it's a paternalistic ICU, where the doctor says, well, I'm running the show here and I'm telling everyone what to do and, chasing people around. You got to watch for those signs. If you feel like there's one person running the show, you're probably right. But that's also not, generally speaking, not a good sign. Right, next. They're denying you specialist input. So what do I mean by that? So specialist input means if someone comes in with, a heart condition, someone comes in with a neurological condition. For a heart condition, there needs to be a cardiologist or a cardiac surgeon, depending on what's happening. For a neurological condition, there needs to be a neurology consult. For a kidney issue, there needs to be a nephrologist, and so forth. You get the gist, right? And again, an ICU that's no good or negative won't allow any specialists to look after your loved one. And that is concerning. That is very concerning. You should always get specialist input, because ICUs are taking care of critical illness, but they're not necessarily taking care of the actual organ. You need the specialist input. Okay, I talked about more than 10 points now, and I've got one more point, and I've got to admit I can't read my own handwriting. Yes, now I can read it. And my last point is the ICU will make it difficult for you to give you access to medical records. right? So any jurisdiction that we work in, UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, anywhere really, wherever we work, you have the right to have access to medical records. And if it's a bad ICU, they will make it difficult for you to access medical records. And that should be a big red flag for you. What is it again? What is it that they have to hide? What is it that you can't see? Should be a major red flag to you. A good ICU will just say, yep, here is access to the medical records, we'll sort it out for you. Here's the link to the website, the username and the password. That's it. End of story. If you don't get that, you should be extremely concerned. You will get the medical records. We never had a client that can't get medical records, but it takes time, or it can take time. And if it takes time because the ICU is not working with you, that's a major red flag. And last but not least, they make it difficult for you to ask questions in the first place. Can't talk to a doctor, can't talk to the nurse. They make it difficult for you. That's another red sign. So those were more than 10 points. If you can think of any others, happy to elaborate, type them in the chat pad. Or I'll give you the numbers where you can call in a minute if you like. Modema, you're saying, yes, this is very important, fill the walls with family pictures. Yes, absolutely. If an ICU doesn't allow any of that, you should also be concerned, right? Because, making it family friendly is very important. And then you're saying there's very little that's unique at this level of care. There's nothing you're not allowed to see. Look, I think, Modema, to a degree it is unique at that level of care because it's sort of a specialist skill, but that's probably more from my perspective as a nurse, where I think it is very unique to a degree. Even though there is some repetitive tasks, I do believe that the level of care being provided in ICU is very unique. And you're right to say that once it's too late, it's too late. I mean, the biggest regret in life is having regret. Having regret that you didn't advocate strong enough, having regret that, you didn't do everything that you can. So, that is a concern. Okay, so if you want to call in now, or if you want to keep continuing typing your questions into the chat pad, you're welcome to do so. If you are in Australia or New Zealand, you can call me on 041 094 2230. That is again Australia, New Zealand, 041 094 2230. If you're in the US, please dial 415 915 0090. That is again US, Canada, 415 915 0090. And if you are in the UK, you can dial in on 0118 324 3018. That is again UK, 0118 324 3018. Now, Modema, you're making another very interesting comment here. You're saying, I'm referring to being sent out or not allowed to readily visit, etc. It should be reasonably open and accommodating. I couldn't agree more with you. Whilst there are times where you might need to send out a family in ICU, for example, for personal care, or for some procedures, I can accept that. But what I can't accept is that you can't visit, whether it's 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. You don't want to disturb a sleep pattern, but, you can sit next to your loved one, and you should be able to sit next to your loved one. There should be no issue whatsoever, there should be no issues with visiting times whatsoever. And there should be no issue with you asking questions, absolutely no issue, I'll give you another hint, and when we're having this at the moment, where, I talked about ward rounds where, if you can't be in a ward round where the doctors, do their daily assessments and plans for your loved one, you should be extremely concerned. Again, what is it that you can't see? If you are allowed, then I'll give you a tip. Record the ward rounds, record them from your phone. just hit the report button. They don't need to know. And then you've got a bit of a collection. You can also share them with us, and then we can elaborate and give you insights, what we think is going to happen, what we think isn't going to happen, and so forth. Modema, you're saying, I was allowed to stay overnight and everything with my beloved. I'm very grateful for that. That's great. That's fantastic to hear. And that is really important. And that's how it should be. That is how it should be. And imagine what families went through in the last 2 years with COVID, with being locked out of ICU, that one might say crimes against humanity, and whilst I can see the whole infection control thing, it's how many families could not see their loved ones while they were on their deathbed. It's heartbreaking. So I'm glad to hear that at least you were able to spend some time with your, I think it was your husband from memory, that at least you had this crucial time with your family member. So that sort of, I would think, at least has eased your pain a little bit, because ICU is an incredibly painful area for a family just to watch. Just to watch their loved ones being in this situation. Yeah, and I'm sure it was a very precious time for you, for sure. So, okay, so please keep your questions coming, or if you want to dial in. Otherwise, I want to, you're also welcome to make suggestions what you want to see in the next live stream next week. I've got a range of topics that I want to talk about, but I'm always guided by what our audience wants as well. Most of it is guided by the audience, because I pick up topics, when I talk to people, what is obviously of interest for them. But if you have any other suggestions, just type them into the chat pad, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com, and I will pick it up from there. If there are no other questions today, then I am going to wrap this up in a minute. And I will see you all again next week. So look, if you have a loved one in intensive care, go to intensivecarehotline.com and call us on one of the numbers on the top of our website, or simply send us an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com. Also, have a look at our membership for families in intensive care at intensivecaresupport.org. I would appreciate if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, if you share this video with your friends and families, if you give it a like, and if you comment below any questions or insights you have, or what you want to see next. I also encourage you to check out our sister site at intensivecareathome.com, where we provide home care services for long-term mechanically ventilated and tracheostomized adults and children at home. We are predominantly operating on the east coast of Australia, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, but also in Perth and Adelaide. Please contact us on one of the numbers there at intensivecareathome.com. Other than that, I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you again next week. In another live stream, I will announce the topic later in the week. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for watching, and thank you for your support. Take care for now.